Snow drifted like quiet ash across King's Cross Station, softening the clang of iron wheels and the murmur of hurried goodbyes. Amidst the restless crowd sat a young woman in a pale blue traveling cloak, her gloved hands folded neatly upon a small valise. The world might have mistaken her for any weary traveler, but there was an unmistakable grace in the way she held herself, too poised, too careful, as though even despair required etiquette. She was Princess Eleanor of Arundel, once promised to a crown that no longer existed. Her kingdom had fallen to revolution the winter before. Her fiancé, a Prussian prince, had sent a single letter, curt, apologetic, final. And now she waited in the station not for him, but for a miracle she could not name. Her breath fogged the air as she lifted her gaze to the station clock. 6 o'clock. Still no one came. Porters passed with pitying glances. A boy offered to carry her case. She thanked him softly but declined. The platform was nearly empty when a carriage halted by the gate, its lanterns glowing like amber eyes through the mist. From within stepped a man, tall, dark-coated, the faintest trace of frost upon his collar. He paused, noticing her, and for an instant, the noise of the station seemed to fade. The Duke of Ashbourne had seen many tragedies in society: fallen heirs, ruined fortunes, widows who smiled through ruin. Yet something about the young woman's stillness drew him like gravity. Her dignity in that moment, abandoned yet unbowed, felt rarer than beauty itself. He approached with measured courtesy, his boots crunching faintly on the snow-dusted floor. "Your Highness," he said, voice low, the title uttered as if it might wound her. "Forgive the intrusion. You are far from home." Eleanor's lashes lifted, revealing eyes that shimmered not with tears, but with exhaustion contained by pride. "There is no home to be far from any more," she replied. "Only places to endure." Her accent carried the musical trace of her lost country. Her words, though simple, held the weight of an exile's composure. He hesitated, sensing the brittle line between pity and respect. "Allow me to at least call a carriage for you. London is unkind to those without lodgings." "I am not without means," she answered quickly, then faltered. "Only without destination." The Duke inclined his head, understanding more than she confessed. "Then let my house serve as one, until you find yours again. My mother will see you properly received." Her instinct was to refuse. She had refused everything since her fall: offers of aid, sympathy, the soft hands of those who wished to save her only to boast of it later. But something in his manner disarmed her. There was no hunger in his gaze, no triumph in his offer. Only warmth, steady and unadorned. She rose, gathering her valise with deliberate grace, and nodded once. Outside, the carriage wheels broke through thin ice on the cobblestones. London's gaslights glowed like distant stars through the veil of snow. She sat across from him in silence, the faint scent of cedar and tobacco lingering between them. When he finally spoke, it was not of politics or scandal, but of smaller, safer things, of the river that froze each year near his estate, of the wild deer that strayed too close to his orchards. He spoke not to fill the silence, but to soften it. By the time the carriage stopped before a tall townhouse of grey stone, her pulse had steadied. Servants appeared at once, bowing as the Duke helped her alight. Inside, the glow of firelight met her like a memory half-remembered. The Duchess of Ashbourne, graceful, silver-haired, and watchful, descended the staircase. Her eyes swept over Eleanor, not with judgment, but curiosity tinged with tenderness. "So this is the girl the snow delivered," she murmured, offering her hand. "You are safe here, my dear. That is all that need concern us tonight." Eleanor curtsied, words caught in her throat. Safety. It was a word that had grown foreign to her. That evening, a quiet supper was laid before her, and though she ate little, the warmth seeped slowly back into her fingers, into her chest. Later, as she stood before the window of the guest chamber, watching the snow fall over London's rooftops, her thoughts turned unbidden to the Duke. His calm voice, his unstudied kindness. There was something disarming about him, something she could neither name nor resist. And yet, she told herself sternly, gratitude is not affection, and kindness is not love. When the clock struck midnight, a knock sounded at her door, a soft, single tap. She opened it to find a maid holding a folded letter sealed with the Ashbourne crest. The maid curtsied and withdrew. Eleanor hesitated before breaking the seal. Inside, written in the Duke's steady hand, were only a few lines. Forgive the liberty. I only wished you to know, no one who has lost a kingdom is unworthy of a home. Sleep in peace, princess. The world may be cruel, but not all hearts within it are so. Her throat tightened. She pressed the paper to her chest, though she did not yet understand why. When morning came, the city stirred beneath a silver dawn. She descended to the breakfast room, the letter hidden within her sleeve. The Duke stood near the hearth, reading a newspaper. Upon seeing her, he smiled, a small, unguarded thing. "Good morning, your Highness," he said. "Did you rest?" She met his gaze, the faintest color rising to her cheeks. "I did. And I thank you, your Grace." Something unsaid passed between them, fragile, uncertain, but alive. Outside, the snow began to fall again. And in that silent flurry, Eleanor realized with a start that, for the first time since her exile, she no longer wished to leave London. Spring came shyly to London, trailing wisteria across stone balconies and scattering soft light through the rain. In the drawing-rooms of Mayfair, where laughter carried like crystal notes, Princess Eleanor's name had returned, whispered not with reverence, but with curiosity. She had reappeared beside the Duke of Ashbourne, not as a bride, nor even as a ward, but as an enigma. The fallen princess who now attended teas and musicales beneath his family's protection. The scandal sheets called her the Duke's charity. Some said he pitied her. Others that he loved her. Neither rumor sat easily upon her heart. In the Duke's townhouse, mornings began with letters and polite conversation. The Duchess guided Eleanor through the labyrinth of English society, introducing her to duchesses and baronesses who smiled too sweetly and asked too many questions. Eleanor endured it with grace, her voice even, her posture immaculate, but the ache beneath her composure grew daily. She could feel the city measuring her, by lineage, by fortune, by the faint tremor of her accent. London adored the spectacle of a woman's fall, but rarely her survival. The Duke, ever observant, noticed her silence. One afternoon, he found her in the conservatory, among the lilies and soft hiss of rain against glass. She sat by the fountain, gloved hands folded in her lap. "They speak of you," he said gently. "They always have," she replied without looking up. "When I was to marry a prince, they spoke of my smile. When the crown fell, they spoke of my ruin. It seems I was made for their tongues." He stepped closer. "You were made for more than talk, princess." His tone was quiet, but something in it unsettled her, the faint edge of feeling too honest for comfort. She rose quickly. "Do not call me that. I am no longer anyone's princess." He regarded her, eyes dark and steady. "Then you are mine to name as I wish. And I call you Eleanor." Her breath caught, not at the words themselves, but the tenderness beneath them. Before she could respond, he drew a small object from his coat pocket, a gold locket, oval and finely wrought, engraved with the Ashbourne crest. "My mother thought you should have this. It belonged to my grandmother, a woman who endured far worse gossip than London could muster." She hesitated. "I cannot accept such a thing." "You can," he said simply, "if you consider it not a gift but a promise, that you will never face a room alone again." She reached for it slowly, the metal warm from his touch. The clasp clicked shut around her neck like a vow. For a time afterward, the city softened. Her presence beside the Duke became familiar, even admired. They rode together in Hyde Park, exchanged letters though they dined at the same table, and once, on a Sunday morning, he asked her to walk with him through the misted gardens of Ashbourne House. She could not remember the last time she had laughed until that day. Yet affection, when born beneath the gaze of society, rarely remains innocent for long. The Duchess, wise in the ways of hearts and headlines, began to see the danger. One evening, after dinner, she summoned Eleanor to her chamber. "My dear," she said, eyes kind but firm, "you are being watched. The city is not kind to a woman living under a man's roof, without a name to shield her." Eleanor's hands trembled. "You mean to say I should leave?" "I mean to say," the Duchess replied, "that you must decide what it is you want, before London decides for you." The days that followed were uneasy. Whispers grew. The society columns hinted at the Duke's impending engagement to Lady Arabella Whitcomb, a paragon of English virtue with fortune enough to silence gossip. Invitations were sent. A date was set. Eleanor received hers in the Morning Post. Cream paper, gold lettering, the Ashbourne seal pressed in wax. She read it once, then again, the ink blurring beneath her fingers. That evening, she wore the locket openly for the first time. When she entered the drawing-room, the Duke looked up from his correspondence. "You received the invitation," he said. "Yes." Her voice did not tremble, though her heart did. "May I ask, is it true?" He set the papers aside. "There are truths that must wear masks for a time, and lies that grow comfortable beneath them," she replied softly. "I see. Then allow me to congratulate you, Your Grace." He took a step toward her, but she turned away before he could speak. The fire crackled between them, painting her face in gold and shadow. When she retired to her room, she found her locket missing. Panic rose sharp and sudden. She searched drawers, cushions, even the folds of her gown. It was gone. She pressed her hand to her throat, feeling the ghost of its weight. The next morning, as the city awoke to fresh gossip about the Duke's wedding, a maid brought her a bouquet of white roses tied with silver ribbon. Nestled among the petals was the lost locket, glinting faintly in the morning light. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she lifted it free. On the back, newly engraved, was a single word: soon. Her breath faltered. The roses slipped from her grasp, scattering across the floor like fallen snow. And for the first time, she wondered whether the Duke's heart was as honest as his eyes, or if he, too, had learned the art of deception that ruled London's glittering world. The bells of St. Clement's tolled across the pale winter morning, their chimes rolling through the fog like a summons. London's streets glittered faintly with frost, carriages lining the square outside the cathedral. Banners of white silk fluttered in the wind, the Duke of Ashbourne's wedding day. Inside her small borrowed carriage, Princess Eleanor sat rigid, gloved hands clasped so tightly her knuckles burned. She had told herself she would not come. She had told herself she would be gracious, composed, indifferent. Yet when the hour arrived, she found her body moving without consent, drawn by a force stronger than pride, by the cruel curiosity of her own heart. The crowd outside the cathedral was immense. Nobles in fur-lined coats, ladies wrapped in pastel silks, journalists with ink-stained fingers straining for glimpses of perfection. Eleanor stepped down, her breath trembling in the cold air. Heads turned, whispers followed. The exiled princess, imagine the courage, or the folly, to attend his wedding. Each voice felt like a pin pressed into her skin. Still, she lifted her chin. Dignity, she reminded herself, was all that remained of royalty. Inside, the cathedral was drenched in candlelight and lilies. The air shimmered with incense and music. Every pew was filled, every gaze turned toward the gilded altar where the Duke stood, solemn and immaculate, his black coat stark against the white marble. He looked almost a stranger, too composed, too distant, as if his heart had been locked behind ceremony. Eleanor found her place among the guests, the Duchess seated beside her, her expression unreadable. When their eyes met, the older woman gave a faint nod, one of sympathy, perhaps, or silent encouragement. But Eleanor could not hold it. Her gaze kept returning to him. As the choir began its hymn, her vision blurred. She remembered his letter, his kindness, the night she had first slept beneath his roof without fear. She remembered the way his voice softened when he said her name. She had mistaken safety for affection once, but now the ache in her chest told her the difference. The ceremony began. The bishop's voice echoed through the nave, solemn and precise. The doors at the far end opened, and a murmur rippled through the guests. The bride appeared, veiled, slender, draped in white silk, her steps measured and slow. Eleanor's throat closed. She forced herself to look away, but the world seemed to narrow to that aisle, that veil, that moment she was meant to forget. She could not breathe. The scent of lilies was suffocating. Her gloved fingers dug into her lap. "This is your punishment," she thought, "for believing kindness might ever belong to you again." Then a hand brushed her shoulder. The Duchess. "Child," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you cannot remain silent." Eleanor turned, startled. "What do you mean? Do you think I cannot see it? He has loved you from the moment he found you in the snow. This," she gestured faintly toward the altar, "is a play, my dear. A cruel and necessary one. He cannot live unloved, and you cannot live pretending indifference. Speak before the vows are sealed." Eleanor shook her head, her breath quickening. "If I interrupt, I ruin him." The Duchess's eyes softened. "You would ruin him more by letting him believe you do not care." The choir's final verse swelled. The bishop turned toward the groom. "Do you, your grace, take this woman?" The words blurred. Eleanor rose. The sound of her gown brushed like wind through the pews. She did not remember walking, only the rhythm of her heart, loud as thunder, carrying her down the aisle. Gasps followed her. Murmurs swelled into astonishment. "Stop," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Please, stop." The bishop faltered mid-blessing. The veiled bride turned her head. Every face in the cathedral fixed upon the intruder, the fallen princess, trembling and radiant beneath the chandeliers. Eleanor's tears fell freely now. "I cannot let this proceed," she cried. "Because he cannot vow what already belongs to me." The crowd held its breath. The Duke's gaze met hers across the distance, and for a moment, the world stilled. His composure broke like thin glass. He stepped down from the altar, every movement deliberate, eyes never leaving hers. When he stood before her, she whispered, barely audible, "Forgive me." "For what?" he murmured. "For not knowing sooner." He reached for her hand, cold and trembling in his. "Then say it, Eleanor. Before them all. Say what you came here to silence." Her breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I love you," she said. "I tried not to. I tried to remember duty and pride and the woman I was. But none of it matters now. If you marry her, I shall die a little every day for what I never dared to speak." A rustle swept through the congregation. The bride's veil trembled, then slipped from her hand to the floor, revealing only emptiness beneath it. There was no bride. No Lady Arabella. Eleanor froze. The realization came like a wave breaking. The wedding had never been real. The Duke smiled faintly, eyes shining with relief and something like awe. "Then you have arrived just in time." The guests erupted, gasps, laughter, applause, confusion, but Eleanor heard none of it. She could only feel the warmth of his hand closing around hers, the scent of lilies dissolving into air, and the bells outside beginning to toll once more, not for ceremony but for revelation. And in that moment, beneath the echo of their sound, she understood. He had never sought to test her dignity, but her heart. Applause rose like a tide, laughter mingling with tears, yet for Eleanor and the Duke, the world had narrowed to silence. The cathedral that moments ago had been a theater of deception now felt like sacred ground. Snow filtered through the high windows, each flake glinting in the candlelight as if blessing their union. Eleanor could scarcely speak. Her voice had been lost in the roar of revelation. He still held her hand before the altar, fingers warm and sure. "Now," he murmured, soft enough that only she could hear, "you finally know what I always did." Her heart stumbled in her chest. "You knew I loved you?" "I knew you would," he said simply. "You only needed the courage to feel it." The Duchess approached then, her eyes bright with triumph and tenderness. "You see, my dear, love requires a little theater sometimes, she said, placing a hand upon Eleanor's cheek. Even the finest hearts must be startled into truth. The guests, sensing the nature of the ruse, broke into applause once more, not mockery but genuine joy. The bishop, bewildered yet smiling, raised his hands. "Then let it be done properly," he declared. "By the power vested in me." But the duke lifted a hand, stopping him gently. "No vows of state," he said. "No signatures, no ceremony for appearance's sake. Only truth." He turned to Eleanor, his expression unguarded. "If you still wish it, then marry me now, not for refuge, not for rank, but for love alone." The words trembled in the air, pure and unscripted. Eleanor's throat tightened. 1,000 thoughts fluttered through her: duty, reputation, the remnants of a crown that once defined her. Yet all of them dissolved before the quiet certainty in his eyes. She nodded, tears glistening. "For love alone," she whispered. And so, beneath the towering arches, amid the scent of lilies and the hush of falling snow, they were wed. No royal decree blessed it, no court announced it, yet to all who watched, it was a union holier than any throne could command. The choir resumed softly, voices rising like wings. When he kissed her, the world seemed to exhale, not in scandal, but in relief. That night, the Ashbourne carriage departed through the snow-laden streets, carrying two souls who no longer owed the world their suffering. London's lights blurred behind them, their glow fading into the soft darkness of the countryside. Inside, Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, her hand resting atop his. For the first time since her exile, she felt something rare, peace unshadowed by fear. At Ashbourne Manor, the fire crackled bright against the winter chill. The house that had once seemed so vast and solemn now felt alive with warmth. The Duchess welcomed them with quiet pride before retiring, leaving the young pair alone in the drawing-room. Silence stretched between them, filled not with awkwardness but wonder. Eleanor traced the edge of the locket that now hung once again around her neck. "You planned it all," she said softly. "Even the invitation, the bouquet, the engraving." He smiled faintly. "I planned only enough to give you a choice. Had you not come, I would have gone through with the pretense and left London by nightfall. I could not bear to see you endure another whisper spoken in my name." She turned to face him fully, the firelight catching the tears she no longer tried to hide. "And if I had stayed away?" He paused. "Then I would have spent my life wondering what might have been, and that is a cruelty I could not have survived." The flames danced between them, golden and tender. She stepped closer, the weight of her gown whispering over the rug. "You risked your name," she said. "For mine." He reached out, brushing his thumb along her jaw. "Names fade, titles crumble. But love—" He stopped, his voice low, reverent. "Love endures when history forgets us." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of church bells from the distant village, not solemn, but celebratory. The night pressed gently against the windows, full of promise. Days turned into weeks. The city's scandal faded into legend, then into fond retelling. The Duchess wrote discreetly to a few society ladies, ensuring the truth of the marriage, that it had been one of affection, not disgrace, found its way into the right drawing-rooms. What had begun as gossip became, curiously, an example, that even among the proud and the polished, love could triumph over decorum. Eleanor grew radiant in the quiet of the countryside. She learned the rhythm of the manor, the song of the orchard thrush, the whisper of the river beyond the hills. The Duke often joined her on the terrace at dusk, both silent, both content. And sometimes, when she caught him watching her, she wondered if he saw the same light in her eyes that had once lived in his. On the first anniversary of their meeting, snow began to fall once more. They stood together at the great window overlooking the garden, the world outside hushed in white. Eleanor turned to him, a playful glimmer in her gaze. "Do you suppose," she asked, "that we would have loved each other without the snow?" He smiled. "No," he said. "Snow reminds us that beauty can survive the cold." Her laughter, quiet and pure, filled the room. She leaned into his arms, and for a long while they watched the flakes drift down like blessings. Beyond the manor, the church bells rang again, faint, distant, eternal. And though their story was born of loss and pride, it would be remembered not as a tale of exile or scandal, but as the day a princess laid down her crown, and a duke taught her that love, once found, is the only kingdom worth ruling.